Thank you. Yeah, the role of banks in complementary currencies. Next slide, please, Monique. Cool, that works. Okay, the purpose of money is to pay taxes. Well, that also goes about the other way, that the reason for supporting a currency is to pay those taxes. The question, of course, when you talk about alternative money, are you tax avoiding, or is it the government is shirking responsibility to engage with community by not using those currency? Okay, next slide, please, Monique. And this is an example from an article that I wrote to the Newcastle Herald. Monique, could you give us a reading of it, please?
Sure. So time to repay volunteers. I note how some firefighting volunteers forfeit paid work in order to do their unpaid work of saving people's houses. This is unfair in the long view. One solution already in place is to use time banking, where you pay the volunteers an hour credit. The wider community can then support by accepting these credits for other goods and services, like washing, dog walking, tutoring, all things that take time. It's a secondary economy using a community currency to support and thank the frontline volunteers that is free to join, and the credits are free to volunteer organisations. The system was set up by the New South Wales government some years ago, and the Hunter and Central Coast Volunteer Centres played a pivotal role in its initial implementation. A relatively small investment would update it.
That article I wrote back on the last day of 2019, still so true. It's basically that we can support the frontline volunteers by accepting this complementary currency called time banking. So it's just one of the examples of what the different types of money might be. Can I have the next slide, please, Monique? Right. Money is sometimes a means to store value, and also for paying taxes, of course. The banks, they take deposits, and they allow you to buy bigger items by putting the balance all together. The law of demand in this case, of course, is both the willingness of somebody to buy something and also the ability to buy something. And banks have that role of being able to increase the ability by putting in extra balance. Okay, next slide, please, Monique. Okay, national dollars, we're sort of all familiar with national dollars. And that has a beautiful thing called compound interest, which is wonderful if it's positive and you are growing your wealth, because it goes faster than a natural growth cycle. So if you have on one hand a natural product such as coal, and on the other hand you have a unnatural product such as national dollars, and you decide which one would you prefer. Would you prefer to have coal which stays at a certain value, or money which you can get compound interest on? It makes sense to liquidate the natural asset to provide the cash to do the compound interest. So long as our financial system is at odds with the natural system, people are going to be liquidating natural assets and not necessarily caring to the environment for it. Okay, next slide, please, Monique. Okay. Right. There are different systems of money, and a good point about the UN development goals, sustainable development goals, is that they want poverty to be reduced and eliminated in the future. The trouble is it's systemic in the national dollar system of wealth inequality because of the compound interest aspect. When you admit that there are multiple currencies possible, the question is, which one is going to give you the best circumstances for what you're wanting to do with it. And that will also be giving you different aspects of law of demand, because for instance, if you have lets, I think I might be ahead of myself. Here, one slide, please. Then the in lets there is zero interest, and so the people who are homeless have the same spending power as the federal government. So the role of banks in that is somewhat different, because there is no the issuing and the sinking of the currency is different in the Let's currency than in other currencies. We have printed local script as an example of probably the closest to the national dollars. There's two famous examples of Bristol pound and the Totnes dollar, Totnes pound. They were both very successful in their time, and there's much to be learnt from those examples in the UK. And some banks have involved in community currency as well as a result of these experiments. Okay, next slide, please, Monique. Okay, in Australia, the Australian Taxation Office has been calling the complementary currencies as counter trade currencies. The counter in that case is actually bean counter as opposed to against currencies. And the local exchange trading system, LETS systems, were declared as not being local because you could actually trade between the LETS systems. So they call them ETS rather than LETS. And of course, that's been rather confused in the database of websites with the new acronym of emission trading scheme coming in to force in the discussions of the tax. Okay, next slide, please. Time banking, source and sink. Yeah, time banking, as said in the article from the Newcastle Herald, it has a source where you're actually doing the volunteer work, and a good thing would be to have a sink as well, where you say have an event to save for at the end of the year, like have a massive concert for volunteers or something, and they can put their hours credit towards a seat in the bleachers or in the stands, so to speak. And another group that's gone into trade exchange currencies was actually Jim Penman from Jim's group. I think a call out and a thanks to Jim for answering some of my market research questions on his Wednesday live stream. Cool. Next slide, please, Monique. Okay. Currently, the national dollar system is a monoculture. So rather than eating rice and pasture and corn and wheat, it's all just very much everybody's eating rice. And so what happens in a global financial crisis where rice is attacked in one part of the world, the attack is capable of taking it out at one part of the world, it will take it out in the rest of the world as well, and you're left with no rice at all. So in terms of the money systems, the best way to go is to actually have a bit of a mix up the currencies and have multiple ones traveling at the same time. At the moment, we have the insistence that the currencies be parity. So one Australian dollar is equal to one local credit unit. For time banking, of course, it's 1 hour. It has to be in 1 hour to make it easy to understand. and and the equivalence means that in terms of taxing, if you make a profit in a certain currency, then you have to consider it equivalent in the national dollars. So you get taxed in national dollars for stuff you've earned in your local currencies. That's a bit awkward because you don't have the national dollars to pay the national tax. So, but the awesome thing is, of course, that it also works the other way, and that if you have a tax loss in a certain currency, then you have to consider that against the national dollars as well. So you can reduce your national dollars tax by having a business loss in the other currency. I think I've missed some of my points. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, permaculture. Yeah, permaculture and how to bring robustness into the system. Well, in permaculture, there's two design rules of thumb here. One is that every element of a design has to have at least 3 functions, and the second thumb that every significant function has to be backed up by more than one element. So that way you actually have a very simple 2 rules for making things incredibly robust. And that's partly why, as permaculture, that they are design of sustainable systems. And if we want our financial system to be sustainable, it's something to bear in mind. Next slide, please. Key recommendations are that tax paid in each currency be treated in parallel, and that that your tax pairs in pairs and bananas, rather than having this equivalence system which buggers up the complementary currencies. The currency is in parallel, yes. Keep the taxes in parallel, and that way it also gives you a chance to have multiple tax-free thresholds, so that people who are on low income can receive a tax-free threshold for each of the currencies in which they participate. So without having to change the tax rate, it just gives you a chance to give a tax break to the lower income bracket. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, recommendations. Another recommendation is that limits to credit so that when you get together as a group, you can actually group the tax-free group the balances. Like the Grameen Bank with its microcredit scheme, they allow a person to borrow a certain amount, but if you wish to borrow a larger balance, you have to have a group of you to sign off on the certain balance. So it makes sense to have a limit of the credit, and also the grouping. So trust actually is something that is worked into the system. So the speed of trust, I refer there to the title of a book by Stephen M.R. Covey, son of Stephen R. Covey from the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He wrote about the speed of trust and how it works, that the cost of transactions and the speed of transactions improves if there is an amount of trust in the system. So trust, not in terms of the trust as a financial trust, but as a smart trust rather than a blind trust of the way things are being done. Okay, and banks, of course, have a role in the putting the social capital together from multiple groups. Okay. We're on that slide, yes. Recommendation 3. The banks not to to be a source of some great stuff there. The banks need to be involved in social capital and the limits to credit and the group transaction. Yeah, okay. Next slide, please, Monique. Okay. Aspects of the bank, I think fairly well explanatory. Basically, it's to use their existing knowledge and social capital and to put that together for the enriching the community in which they are, and that they should be sort of local and should be working towards increasing the local knowledge and richness of the financial system. So, for instance, if you wanted to do, I think this is the next slide again, Monique. So if you wish to do, sorry, no, back again, please, back one. There's another tax reform which is possible, which you might, bank could possibly make some profits out of, and that is that you have a tax reform where you tax, again, pears and pears, bananas and bananas, and take it literally to having coffee and coffee. For instance, if a cafe wanted to reduce its effective tax rate, they would sell coffee for $5 for a coffee, and they pay that as their tax. And once they got the $5 coffee, you got to realize that it only cost them $1 to make. So they've got an effective tax rate of $1 for the $5 they've paid in tax. So there's role for a bank in terms of working out these trades and working out, therefore, how you get the reduced effective tax rate without actually having to change the tax rate itself. It's the profit engaging the marketing budget of the cafe and getting them to sell to the government the goods and services that the cafe already provides. So I will end with the next slide, just very briefly. A point to note about currencies typically is that the positive interest rate and compound interest stuff is all great, well and great when you have something like superannuation and you're trying to outpace inflation. Everybody can see that your fund is doing wonderfully well, and it's a nice big positive number that you can put forward to saying we've said X number of dollars for the community. But the optimal for superannuation, for instance, is actually to go the other direction and invest in reducing the cost of living in the area in which you wish to retire. And in that regard, it would be the bank would have a role in, say, reducing the cost of transactions or something like that in the area that their investors are retiring to. But the point of that particular one is showing a systemic difference between the positive compound interest and the reducing costs, because the reducing costs one is illegal if you are currently living in the area that you wish to retire, because that's producing a pre-retirement benefit, which is illegal under the current system. Whereas in reality, it would actually mean that it would give you the most disposable income for reinvesting into superannuation, and therefore increasing the amount of money you have in super. So in terms of government pensions, it would be a system that would have the lowest pressure on government pensions for increasing. So, and probably the best sort of benefits for the community. So I'll leave it there in just saying that I wish everybody to know that there are multiple monetary systems possible. They have different rules. You choose when you're doing an investing, you choose which one you want to do for the cost. And also your cost and profit don't have to be in the same currency. So it's best to choose the currency that you need to work with. And I just want to leave everybody with the idea that you can actually uh, use different currencies. There are different currencies available. And Monique, can I just have one more slide? It's just the last one with my contact details. Apologies for the ranting and raving and rambling. I am blind and I was using dot points a fair bit. Sorry about that, guys. And basically that's the end of my talk, Monique.